My name is Shayna J. Pena. I'm 32, and if you had seen me that Thursday evening in late summer, sitting in my parents' backyard under the faint buzzing string lights, you would have thought I was having a perfectly normal night. Everyone had a glass in hand, laughing about something my cousin had done on a past trip, and I wasn't really part of the conversation until my mom looked directly at me and said quietly, "This weekend's just for the people who really matter." Before I could even process it, my sister leaned back in her chair and added, "You wouldn't enjoy it anyway." I raised my glass, kept my smile steady, and said, "Understood." To them, it probably looked like I was letting it roll off my back, like I was used to being dismissed. But in that moment, a switch flipped. It wasn't just what they said, it was what it represented. The casual way they erased me while still expecting to enjoy the life I'd been quietly paying for. Because the thing they didn't realize was that this particular weekend wasn't something they'd cobbled together on their own. I had been the one who booked the oceanfront resort months in advance, securing suites with panoramic views. I'd reserved the spa package my mom wouldn't stop talking about, prepaid for the treatment so no one would have to pull out a card. I'd even covered the deposit for the yacht they were planning to take out for an afternoon sail, complete with a catered lunch and champagne. They didn't even know the cost because, as always, I handled it all quietly. That's been the pattern for years. I've always been the one who foots the bill. Vacations, birthdays, unexpected hospital bills, new furniture, even car repairs. Whenever someone in my family needed something, I stepped in. Not once did I make a big deal out of it. I thought it was what you did when you were fortunate enough to have more than enough. My company had been doing well for years. I'd made the right investments and money was never the issue. What I didn't realize back then was that generosity, if never respected, can quietly turn into a leash, one they could pull any time they wanted something. I didn't argue with them that night. I didn't ask why. I didn't push back or demand an explanation. I just drove home without saying another word about it, because something in me had gone oddly calm, the kind of calm that scares you later when you look back and realize you didn't feel hurt, you felt finished. When I walked into my place, my boyfriend, Ethan Cole, looked up like he could tell immediately that something was off. He asked why I was so quiet, and I gave him the same automatic answer I always gave when I didn't want to talk. I told him I was fine. He didn't believe me. He asked if it was my mom again, and I finally said the words out loud, that they told me I wasn't invited this weekend. He asked what weekend, and I realized how ridiculous it sounded that he didn't even know about it, while my family was already acting like it was theirs by default. I poured myself a drink, opened my laptop, and logged into my accounts. One by one, I erased everything. The resort canceled, the spa refunded, the yacht gone from the schedule. I didn't just cancel, I made sure the bookings couldn't be reactivated without my direct approval. When I finished, I sat there for a moment, feeling an unfamiliar mix of calm and anticipation. The pieces were set. They wouldn't know until it was too late. And for the first time in years, I was looking forward to seeing their reactions. Saturday morning came with the kind of weather that makes travel brochures look believable. Clear blue sky, soft breeze, sunlight reflecting off the water like glitter. It was the perfect day for a luxury yacht outing, the very one my family had been bragging about to anyone who'd listen. I woke up earlier than usual, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to picture every moment as it happened. I made coffee, sat on my balcony, and imagined the scene unfolding at the dock. There would have been high spirits on the drive there. My mom probably had her oversized sun hat and that silk scarf she only wore on important occasions. My sister would be scrolling through her phone, already composing the Instagram captions in her head. My dad would be going over the itinerary out loud, like he personally arranged everything. They had no idea that the only reason any of it was possible was because I'd quietly made it happen months ago. By the time they stepped onto the dock, I imagined my mom was already waving at the crew, expecting the red carpet treatment. The yacht captain, tall guy, always in sunglasses, would greet them with a clipboard and ask for the reservation name. My mom would give it like she was announcing royalty. Then the pause would come, not long, just long enough for the smile to fade from her face. The captain would check his list again, tap the screen of his tablet, and finally tell her there was no booking under that name. My mom would insist there had to be some mistake. My sister would step in, voice rising, telling him to check again. The captain, professional but firm, would show them the timestamp of the cancellation and point out that the payment had been refunded in full. My sister would demand to know to whom, as if she didn't already suspect. And I could picture my dad stepping aside to make a call, muttering about straightening this out. A few seconds later, I knew my phone would light up with his name. I didn't need to guess what he would say. I'd heard that tone before, the voice of a man who only knows how to be a problem solver when someone else is footing the bill. The difference this time was simple. This time, I wasn't going to save them from the consequences of treating me like I didn't matter. My phone lit up right on schedule. My dad's name filled the screen while I was still sitting on my balcony, coffee cooling in my hand. The moment I answered, there was no greeting, no hesitation. "Fix this now," he said, his voice tight and sharp, like the problem existed only because I hadn't handled it yet. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle before I replied. "You told me I wouldn't enjoy the weekend," I said calmly. "I took your advice." Then I ended the call before he could say anything else. For a moment, there was nothing. Just silence on my end and the faint city noise drifting up from the street below. But I knew exactly what was happening on theirs. They were scrambling. My mom would be insisting this had to be a mistake. My sister pacing the dock with her phone pressed to her ear, raising her voice at anyone who looked like they might be able to help. My dad would be standing slightly apart, jaw clenched, already planning how to force the situation back into his control. They weren't embarrassed yet. Not really. They were still in the phase where they believed money could fix everything if they threw enough of it at the problem. What they didn't realize was how expensive their confidence really was. I knew they'd try to pay for the yacht themselves, only to finally see the actual cost laid out in black and white. I knew someone would suggest calling the resort to check in early, thinking at least they could salvage part of the weekend. And I knew exactly how that conversation would go, because I'd made sure of it. By the time they reached the front desk with their rolling luggage and forced smiles, they'd be told politely that there was no reservation in their names. The system would show the booking had been canceled days earlier. The funds returned to the original payment method. No exceptions. No availability. Peak season at a luxury oceanfront resort doesn't bend for entitlement. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed again. Then again. Then again. I didn't answer any of them. My dad, my sister, my mom. I set the phone face down on the counter and started making breakfast, moving slowly, deliberately, like I had all the time in the world. That was the thing they'd never understood about me. I don't rush when I'm sure of my decision. The first message that actually caught my attention wasn't from any of them. It was a text from my cousin Emily. "What happened?" it read. "Your mom's crying at the marina." I could picture it perfectly. My mom sitting on one of those wooden benches, oversized sunglasses hiding her eyes, telling anyone within earshot how humiliated she was. My sister would be pacing nearby, phone glued to her hand, calling every relative she could think of to tell them what Shayna had done. That's her pattern. Make enough noise, get enough people involved, and eventually the pressure forces someone to cave. This time, they weren't dealing with the old version of me. About an hour later, my dad called again. His tone had shifted, less yelling, more probing. "Tell me straight," he said. "Did you cancel the resort too?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch just long enough for him to understand that I didn't need to confirm anything. I heard him exhale through his nose, that short, sharp sound he makes when he's cornered. Then the line went dead. It didn't take long for the next update. Emily called to say they'd packed up and driven to the resort anyway, hoping maybe something would shake loose if they showed up in person. They walked in expecting keys and apologies. Instead, they got polite smiles and firm explanations. My sister apparently launched into the same routine she'd used at the dock, demanding to see a manager, dropping my name like it was a magic password. My mom stood stiffly beside her, insisting she'd confirm the details personally, which was a flat-out lie. My dad pulled out his credit card, ready to throw money at the problem, but peak season prices weren't what they'd budgeted for, and even if they'd been willing to pay, the resort was fully booked. The only vacancies left in town were at budget motels miles from the water. One didn't have air conditioning. Another had reviews complaining about mold. My mom refused to even consider them. They stood in the parking lot for nearly an hour, luggage beside them, trying to figure out what to do, while my sister kept calling relatives for support. Some offered sympathy. None offered their credit cards. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "We need to talk." I read it, set my phone down, and went back to seasoning the ribeye I was about to throw on the grill. The sun was warm. The air smelled like rosemary and charcoal, and for the first time in a long time, my weekend was entirely my own. By Sunday morning, it was clear they'd moved past the "this must be a misunderstanding" phase. Now it was a coordinated campaign. The calls came in clusters: mom, dad, sister, then Aunt Carol, then another cousin. They weren't acting individually anymore. They were working as a unit, taking turns like they were running shifts in a siege. The first voice I actually answered wasn't any of theirs. It was my cousin Mark, and we hadn't had a real conversation in years. That told me immediately he'd been drafted as the neutral peacemaker. He started with harmless small talk about my business, about how impressive it was that I'd built everything myself. Then, gradually, he slid into the real reason for the call. He said my mom was really upset, that the whole family was talking about this mess, and that I should just sort it out because family comes before pride. I told him it wasn't pride, it was principle. I told him they'd gotten so used to me paying for everything that they felt entitled to it, and that telling me I didn't matter while enjoying the very things I paid for was where the line was drawn. He didn't like that answer. I could hear the awkward pause before he muttered, "Maybe they didn't mean it that way." By late morning, the approach shifted again. My mom sent a massive group text that included her, my dad, my sister, both aunts, and a couple of cousins. The tone was theatrical. She wrote about humiliation, about strangers witnessing their embarrassment, about the family's reputation taking years to rebuild. Then came the line that made my stomach tighten. "You've always handled our accounts," she wrote. "Maybe we should rethink that." It was subtle, but it was a threat all the same. Years ago, my parents had asked me to manage a joint investment account for them. I'd done it for free, kept it growing, never taken a cent. The fact that they were even hinting at using it as leverage told me two things. One, they were desperate, and two, they had seriously misjudged how far they could push me. Then came the twist that told me just how ugly this was about to get. Around 3 that afternoon, I got an email from the general manager of the resort addressed directly to me. He said he'd received a formal complaint from my sister, alleging that the cancellations were fraudulent and that I had stolen her vacation. She had escalated it to the corporate level, demanding they reinstate the bookings at no cost to her and accusing me of financial abuse. I called him immediately. He was professional, but I could hear the disbelief in his voice. I explained that I was the original payer, the account holder, and the only authorized person on the reservation. I made it very clear that my sister had no legal or financial rights to any of it. He let out a quiet chuckle and said, "I figured as much. She's been calling every hour since yesterday." By evening, the family messages shifted tone again. The pleading was gone. Now it was pure entitlement. My dad wrote that I owed them for everything they'd done for me over the years. My sister said if I didn't fix it, I'd burn every bridge in this family. My mom tried one last angle, saying she'd never forget how I'd abandoned them in a moment of need. I poured myself a drink and sat on my balcony, the glass cool in my hand, watching the sun dip below the buildings. They were scrambling because for the first time, they were seeing a truth they'd ignored for years. Without me, they couldn't fund their lifestyle. And worse, they had no real way to force my hand. They thought the weekend was the problem. They didn't know yet that the yacht was just the first domino. Monday morning arrived with a kind of quiet that felt deceptive. No calls, no texts, no notifications lighting up my phone every few minutes. On the surface, it looked like they'd finally backed off, but I know my family too well. Silence with them isn't surrender. It's preparation. They don't retreat. They regroup. I spent the morning in my home office, catching up on work I'd deliberately ignored over the weekend. My company didn't pause just because my family had imploded, and there was something grounding about focusing on spreadsheets, emails, and deadlines that actually made sense. Ethan checked in on me between meetings, asking if they'd tried anything else. I told him not yet, but even as I said it, I knew that wasn't the end of it. The calm felt borrowed, like it would be taken back the moment I let my guard down. Around midday, my phone buzzed with a notification that made my stomach drop. It wasn't a call or a text, it was an email. The subject line read, "Formal complaint received," and it was addressed directly to me from the general manager of the resort. I already knew what it was about before I opened it. My sister had taken it further, much further. She'd filed an official complaint alleging that the cancellations were fraudulent and that I had stolen her vacation. She accused me of financial abuse and demanded the resort reinstate the bookings at no cost to her, escalating it all the way up to corporate. I stared at the screen for a moment, not because I was confused, but because something inside me finally hardened. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was escalation. This was her trying to turn my refusal into a crime. I called the manager immediately. His voice was polite, professional, but there was an edge of disbelief underneath it. I explained everything calmly. I was the original payer, the account holder, the only authorized person on the reservation. I told him my sister had no legal or financial rights to any of it. He listened, then let out a quiet chuckle. "I figured as much," he said. "She's been calling every hour since yesterday." That was the moment I understood something important. My sister wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't hurt. She was furious that she'd lost control, and she was willing to rewrite reality to get it back. By late afternoon, the family started up again, but this time the tone was different. The pleading was gone. The guilt-tripping had sharpened into something uglier. My dad sent a long message about everything they'd ever done for me, as if love was a ledger and I was overdue on a payment. My sister followed with a threat disguised as concern, saying if I didn't fix this, I'd burn every bridge in the family. My mom tried one last emotional angle, telling me she'd never forget how I'd abandoned them in a moment of need. I read every message without responding, feeling a strange mix of clarity and exhaustion. They weren't asking anymore. They were demanding. And demands are easy to say no to. That evening, while I was sitting on the balcony with a drink, watching the city lights flicker on one by one, I got a call from someone I didn't expect. It was my cousin Mark again, his voice careful, like he was stepping through a minefield. He told me the family was in full panic mode, that everyone was talking about how far I'd gone, and that maybe I should consider meeting them halfway before things got worse. I asked him what worse looked like. He hesitated, then said, "You know how they are when they feel cornered." I did know, and that was exactly why I wasn't backing down. The next morning confirmed my instincts. An email from my accountant hit my inbox with the subject line, "Urgent Potential Fraud." She'd forwarded a message from the property management company that handles one of my rental homes. According to them, someone had called claiming to be me, saying there was a change in my financial strategy and that rent payments needed to be redirected to a new bank account for tax purposes. They'd used my old high school address as verification, something that isn't public and hasn't been relevant in decades. The property manager immediately knew something was off. He refused to make the change and contacted my accountant directly. I didn't need to ask who it was. That night, my cousin Emily called me, her voice low and uneasy. She said my sister had been asking her oddly specific questions about my assets, which properties were in my name, which ones were owned through my company, how much I kept in liquid funds. Emily swore she hadn't given her any answers, but she thought I should know. Then she added something else, almost as an afterthought. My mom, apparently, had been meeting with a friend who was good with paperwork. Emily didn't say it outright, but she didn't have to. Someone who knew how to dig into records. Someone who might know how to apply pressure. The final confirmation came the next morning when my sister posted one of her cryptic messages online. Some people think cutting ties makes them untouchable. It doesn't. There were no names, no details, just enough ambiguity to feel threatening. This wasn't bitterness anymore. It was reconnaissance, probing, looking for weak spots. I closed my laptop, sat back in my chair, and felt something settle into place. I wasn't going to keep reacting to their moves. I wasn't going to wait for the next attempt to hijack my finances or my name. I'd spent years playing defense, smoothing things over, fixing messes before they became visible. That era was over. If they wanted to turn this into a power game, I was done pretending I didn't know how to play. I picked up my phone and started making calls. My attorney, my accountant, my property manager. I told them all the same thing. I wanted everything reviewed. Every account, every property, every access point where my life intersected with my family's assumptions. I wasn't angry when I said it. I was calm, focused, decisive. They thought the canceled weekend was the message. They had no idea what was coming next. Once I decided to go on the offensive, I didn't hesitate. By noon that same day, my attorney was on the phone, my accountant was in my inbox, and my property manager was looped into a three-way call that lasted longer than I expected. I wanted everything examined, every account, every property, every automatic payment, every single point where my name intersected with my family's access. We started with the joint investment account I'd been managing for my parents for years. It was still healthy, still growing, because I'd treated it with the same care I gave my own money. I didn't take it from them, but I did transfer oversight into a trust under my name, with a separate attorney as the sole administrator. My parents were still beneficiaries, but they could no longer move a single dollar without formal approval. It wasn't revenge, it was containment. Next came the properties. I confirmed every deed, every title, every legal structure. Anything owned personally or through my company was flagged with a fraud alert at the county recorder's office. If anyone tried to file a lien, request a change, or submit paperwork in my name, I'd be notified immediately. Bank accounts were locked down with physical security keys instead of phone-based verification. No reset links, no guessing personal details. Even the yacht club membership my dad liked to mention as if it were his personal status symbol was updated so that no one but me had authorization to book, charge, or even inquire under my name. By the time we finished, there wasn't a single door left unlocked. I was still sitting at my desk when my security camera feed pinged my phone. Movement in my driveway. A rideshare idling at the curb. 2 figures stepping out. Even through the grainy angle, I knew exactly who they were. My sister was first, oversized sunglasses on her face, phone in her hand like it was already recording. A few seconds later, my mom stepped out from the other side of the car, moving slower, her posture already arranged into the familiar shape of wounded dignity. I didn't rush to the door. I let them stand there for a moment, ringing the bell, wondering if I'd even acknowledge them. When I finally opened it, I didn't invite them in. I leaned against the doorframe instead, keeping my body between them and my home like a boundary made physical. My sister jumped in immediately, telling me I'd proven whatever point I was trying to make, and that it was time to fix things before this got worse. I asked her what worse meant. She smirked and said the family had ways of making sure I'd regret letting money get between us. That was the moment I stepped fully outside and closed the door behind me, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted nothing inside my home touched by what they were bringing. I told them everything I'd been holding back for years. I reminded them of every vacation, every meal, every bill I'd quietly covered without hesitation. I told them it was never an obligation. It was my choice. But they had turned it into an expectation. They hadn't thanked me. They hadn't respected me. They treated my generosity like it was their right. I explained that the ruined weekend wasn't punishment. It was a preview. From now on, they would book their own trips, pay for their own luxuries, and plan their own lives without assuming I'd step in at the last minute to save them. My mom tried to interrupt with the same emotional appeals she'd always used, talking about family unity and respect, but I didn't let her steer the conversation. I told them that as of that morning, I had removed myself from every financial arrangement I'd been overseeing for the family. The investment account was still theirs, but it was now fully their responsibility. No more quiet management. No more safety net. My sister's confidence cracked for the first time, her voice losing that practiced edge as she started to say something about what people would think. I cut her off. I told her the only people who cared about their image were them, and that public perception wasn't worth the years of entitlement I'd tolerated. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then my mom told my sister they should leave before they made a scene. They turned and walked back toward the waiting car without looking at me, not speaking to each other. The rideshare pulled away, and my driveway went quiet again. My phone stayed silent for hours. Then, just after 9 that night, I got a single text from my dad. Message received. I knew from experience that received didn't mean understood, and it definitely didn't mean accepted. The next few days were eerily calm. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits, not even one of my sister's usual vague posts online. On the surface, it looked like they'd finally backed down, but I knew better. They weren't done. They were recalibrating. And sure enough, on the 4th day, the passive aggression started to surface. A cousin posted a sunset photo with a caption about people forgetting who helped them shine. An aunt uploaded a beach picture with a line about still knowing how to have a good time without drama. My sister went further, posting a mirror selfie in a worn-out spa robe with the caption, "Self-care on my own dime," like it was a victory lap instead of a consolation prize. I didn't respond to any of it. I wanted them to sit with the discomfort. 2 weeks later, my mom called like nothing had happened, asking casually if I'd be coming to Thanksgiving. I gave a non-committal answer, knowing that wasn't the real reason she'd reached out. After a pause, she admitted things had been tight since I stepped back from the accounts. My dad had locked himself out of one of the brokerage logins, triggering a security freeze. My sister was asking them for money between paychecks while still spending on things she claimed were necessities. I told my mom exactly what I'd told her at my front door. I wasn't fixing their problems anymore. She didn't argue. She just went quiet and changed the subject. A month later, my sister made another move. She emailed an invitation for a family weekend in the mountains. The wording was careful. No mention of cost. Just the assumption that if I accepted, I'd automatically cover the cabins. I replied with 2 words. "Sounds expensive." She never responded. Over the next few months, the shift became obvious. They stopped talking about trips around me. My sister kept her distance unless there were witnesses. My dad stayed polite but short. My mom filled the space with small talk, careful not to mention money. The most telling change wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't say. No more hints. No more expectations. They'd learned, finally, that the safety net they'd been swinging on wasn't theirs. It wasn't just about a canceled weekend anymore. It was about resetting the balance after years of unspoken assumptions. They now knew, without question, that I could cut the cord and walk away without looking back. And in that knowledge, they started treading carefully. That was the real shift, and I knew, even then, that they weren't finished testing it. 2 weeks after that carefully worded invitation to the mountains, things had gone quiet enough that I almost believed they'd finally learned their lesson. No calls, no group texts, no passive-aggressive quotes floating across my feed. For a brief moment, I let myself think that maybe the boundary had held, that maybe this time the message had actually landed. But with my family, silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. The first crack appeared in an email from my accountant with the subject line, "Urgent potential fraud." Inside was a forwarded message from the property management company that handled one of my rental homes. According to them, someone had called claiming to be me, saying there was a change in my financial strategy and that rent payments needed to be redirected to a new bank account for tax reasons. What made it chilling was the detail. They'd used my old high school address as verification, something that isn't public and hasn't mattered in decades. The property manager sensed something was off, refused the request, and contacted my accountant instead. By the time I finished reading the email, there was no shock left in me, only confirmation. That same evening, my cousin Emily called. Her voice was hesitant, apologetic, like she already knew she was about to deliver bad news. She told me my sister had been asking her strangely specific questions about my assets. Which properties were in my personal name? Which ones were owned through my company? How much I kept liquid? Emily swore she hadn't answered, but she wanted me to be aware. Then she added one more thing, almost as if she hoped I wouldn't catch it. My mom, apparently, had been meeting with a friend who was good with paperwork. Emily didn't explain further, but she didn't need to. Someone who knew how to dig. Someone who might know how to apply pressure. The final signal came the next morning when my sister posted a cryptic message online. Some people think cutting ties makes them untouchable. It doesn't. No names. No context. Just enough to sound confident. Just enough to feel like a threat. That was the moment I stopped hoping they'd back down. I wasn't dealing with hurt feelings anymore. I was dealing with people who believed they were entitled to what I'd built, and who were now actively probing for ways to take it. I didn't wait. By noon, my attorney was on the phone, my accountant was already pulling reports, and my property manager was looping in their legal team. I told them all the same thing. I wanted everything locked down. Every account, every property, every automatic payment, every possible access point where my name intersected with my family's assumptions. We moved methodically. Oversight on the joint investment account was transferred into a trust structure with an independent administrator. My parents remained beneficiaries, but they could no longer touch a dollar without formal approval. Deeds were reviewed and flagged with fraud alerts. Bank accounts were secured with physical authentication keys instead of phone codes. Even the yacht club membership, the one my dad liked to reference as if it were his own badge of importance, was updated so that only I could authorize bookings or charges. It took less than a week. By the time we finished, there wasn't a single door left unlocked. The first sign that they noticed came when my dad tried to log into the investment account and got an error message. He called me, his voice sharp, demanding to know why it was locked. I told him it wasn't locked. It was secured. And if he needed anything, he could make a formal request through my attorney. The second sign came when my sister tried to call the property manager about adjusting rental payments on one of my houses. She was told politely that nothing could be discussed without my written authorization. She didn't even bother calling me afterward. My mom didn't reach out at all, but I heard from Emily that she'd stopped bragging to her friends about family weekends and my generosity. For the first time in years, they couldn't touch anything of mine. Not my money, not my bookings, not my name to get special treatment. And I could feel the shift. They weren't happy, but they knew they couldn't undo it. That was the point. They thought the weekend I canceled was the message. It wasn't. The real message was this. They had never been entitled to my success. And now they couldn't even pretend they were. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled, grounded, like I'd finally stepped out of a role I'd been cast in without my consent. One evening, Ethan sat beside me on the balcony, the city quiet beneath us, and asked how I felt about everything now that the dust was settling. I thought about it for a moment before answering. I told him it felt like standing on solid ground after years of balancing on something that was never meant to hold me. The guilt was gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was clarity. My family still exists in my life, just at a distance that keeps me whole. They're careful now, measured. And that's not because I threatened them. It's because they finally understand something they ignored for years. The safety net they'd been swinging on was never theirs. It was mine, and I could pull it away at any time. That understanding changed everything.